I think we are live. Yes, we are. That's amazing. Thank you again for watching my DevSecOps live sessions. Welcome again. Welcome to my DevSecOps. My DevSecOps is a all-inclusive community that wants to educate people about, well, security, right? So today we have Francesca Buller on, and she will be talking about one second, because now I hear myself. So again, we have Francesca on, and she will be talking about web application firewalls. Francesca is an architect for Puzzle ITC and a security enthusiast. She is in cybersecurity for over 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. She has a background in web application firewalls. That's why she's going to talk about it. She was a co-developer on the OWASP ModSecurity core rule set, if I'm correctly informed. And currently she is part of the OWASP DevSlop team, which integrates CRS into continuous integration pipelines. But before we dive into all of that, let me introduce myself. My name is Brian Vermeer. Normally you see Sam Hepburn over here, but I will be taking over this live session. I'm one of the developer advocates for Snyk and one of the humans behind the whole my DevSecOps community. So again, welcome. We love your feedback. And if you have feedback, you can ping us on Twitter, or you can go to the Slack. The Slack is the best way to connect with us. And if you have questions during this talk, please go to the Slack. You can find the Slack on mydevsecops.io. You can find a link over there if you're not yet enrolled. If you're there and you have questions, go to the live session channel. I will be the proxy between Francesca and myself and you to make sure that all the questions will be there at an appropriate time, probably at the end of the talk. So if you come up with questions, please put them in the live channel. Even if you have questions afterwards, I mean, this session will be published right after we're done. And if you have questions, please post them in the live channel, and we will try to redirect them or answer them ourselves if we're possible. But I saw Francesca is also on the Slack, so she might be able to answer them as well. Last thing I need to tell you is my DevSecOps is brought to you by Snyk. Snyk is our main sponsor, but we try to create a vendor-neutral space to share knowledge and best practices that are related to software security. All right, that's enough for me. For now, I will give the word to Francesca, and welcome to, I think, your first my DevSecOps virtual session.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, I would say the floor is yours. Give it a go.
Okay, I will share my screen. And here are my slides. So today we will talk about web application firewalls. And are they friends of your DevOps pipeline? And I want to spread the word about web application firewalls because I like web application firewalls a lot. And I also want to make web application firewalls a part of DevOps. And the first time I told the developer about this idea, he replied, yes, that is exactly what we need. And he said to me, because it was just last week when your web application firewall broke our application after migration. Well, that hurts, but they have a well-tested platform, but the WAF was not part of the tests. It was only added to production. And unfortunately, the application was no longer reachable. And it was an operator that added to WAF to production, but this could have happened to me too. And I think this could have happened to any one of us. So this example or this story shows that we make a fundamental mistake with web application firewalls in production. So this is me. My name is Francesca Buller, and I'm an architect. I work at Puzzle ITC. It's a Swiss and German company. And of course, I add WAFs wherever I can. And in my spare time, I'm a co-developer of WAF rules, and I help improve and extend the OWASP ModSecurity core rule set. And I'm also a team member of the OWASP DevSlop project. And of course, I added the WAF to this project too. And in today's session, we will see the Pixie CRS module. That's one of the modules. And we will see this pipeline in a demo later. So first of all, let me explain what a web application firewall is. And then I will introduce ModSecurity and the OWASP ModSecurity core rule set. And then in comes the integration of a WAF in a DevOps pipeline. And at the end, I would like to give you a brief overview of ModSecurity and the core rule set at Puzzle ITC. So what is a web application firewall? I think most of you know what a WAF is, but so that we are all talking about the same thing. A web application firewall is the first line of defense against web application attacks. We see ASCII injection, cross-site scripting, and so on. We also know them as the OWASP Top 10. And the web application firewall works on a higher application layer and not on the TCP or IP layer, like a traditional firewall. And to answer a question right from the start, no, a WAF does not mean that you don't have to write secure code. It's meant as a safety net in front of your application, because you can never trust your code 100%, or you don't have control over the application. And a WAF does not stop every attack, but it makes it harder to exploit an existing vulnerability in the web application. And it also offers you with HTTP traffic monitoring and logging. So you get deep insight into the traffic. This is a picture we don't want to see when we work with a web application, right? And my experience with developers and operators is that they sometimes fear web application firewalls because they can also block legitimate traffic. And this means that the user cannot use the application properly. And I think this problem is even worse in a DevOps culture where everything is fully automated and well tested. And at the end, we add a WAF to production, and that's too late, because it's too late to find and fix the problems. What happens now? The operator will switch off the web application firewall because the user cannot use the application. And unfortunately, once it goes live, the operator doesn't want to touch the WAF anymore because it finally works and he is happy or she is happy. They have a lot of other work to do, and yes, security is boring and does not always have top priority. So they plan to tune the WAF and maybe switch it on when they have more time. But yeah, to be honest, this time maybe never comes. And I think this is really annoying. And I, even as an advocate of web application firewalls, fully understand the operator. So I think we need a better process to get WAFs into production. But what if we add a web application firewall to an early stage of the DevOps process and not at the end, at production? If we have already automated application tests, we should add the WAF to these tests. And this seems obvious. And as so often, automation is the key, of course, and I will come to that in a moment. But first, let me head over to ModSecurity and the core rule set, because ModSecurity is one such WAF. It's a very popular and widespread web application firewall. I think a lot of you already know ModSecurity. It's available as Nginx, Apache, or IS module, and it's open source and free. And now, ModSecurity provides the engine, and the engine needs rules to do its job. It needs patterns to compare with the HTTP traffic. And here is where the OWASP ModSecurity core rule set comes in. It's an open source project too, and it provides rules for ModSecurity. It provides you with a standard rule set to fight against these web application attacks. And these rules mainly consist of regular expressions which look for a pattern, and it's a set of generic blacklisting rules. And here we see the really cool poster of the core rule set version 3. And since this version, it's easy to configure and to run. It's no longer only for WAF experts. And also the amount of false positives was reduced massively. So we no longer have to fear much of false positives. But we from the core rule set are interested in receiving feedback. So if you have a false positive, please let us know and help us improve the rule set. And by the way, we released 3.2 in last September. It only takes 3 steps to install the core rule set. And here we see the installation on Nginx. Of course, ModSecurity has to be installed, and then you clone the Git repository or you download the zip file. You copy the example configuration file to your crsetup.conf, and you include the crsetup.conf and all the rule files into your Nginx configuration. And that's all. And then you have a default installation, and it provides you with basic security. And we say that in the default installation, about 80% of web attacks are covered for you. The core rule set has rules that inspect incoming HTTP requests for common web attacks. As we see on the word cloud, most of the rules are written against ASCII injection, cross-site scripting, for protocol enforcement, but there are a lot more attacks that will be blocked. And here we see an example of a malicious request. Someone tries to get an etc shadow from the web service file system. And this request triggers 3 core rule set rules. First, the core rule set detects the path traversal. It detects that someone tries to go back in the file system. And it also detects that someone tries to access a local OS file. And it also identifies etc shadow as a common sequence found in shell command. So this request would be blocked by the core rule set. And outgoing responses are examined too. And here we are looking for data leakages and stack traces, which should not be returned to user. And again, we see that most of the rules are written against ASQL, data leakages and stack traces. Because this is bad, right? This is an example of a non-blocked ASQL stack trace, and you don't want to show this error to user or an attacker. It discloses very sensitive information. And the core rule set could block such a response for you. So this all sounds very good and reasonable, and I think everyone wants to have a WAF right now. I hope so. But the problem here is the real world, because sometimes also a legitimate request from a legitimate user triggers a false positive, triggers a core rule set rule, and we call them false positives. And one example is an address. The address 100 Union Street triggered an ASCII injection error because of the combination of the digits and the union. Because it looks a bit like an ASCII injection and it's not. And I said triggered because this false positive has been reported and has been resolved by the core rule set team, so it no longer concerns you. But what do we do when we have a false positive? Of course, we have to have the right tools to fight against false positives. If you have one, have a look at the ModSecurity log, and then you fix your application if this is possible and necessary. And typical false positives I often see are in argument names, arguments, cookies, or cookie names, if, for example, special characters were used or random strings. Or you open an issue on the GitHub core rule set project. As I already said, we don't want to have any false positives, especially in the default installation. So please let us know if we have to improve a rule for all. Or if you think it only affects you and your application, you can do ModSecurity tuning. And this means that you partially disable or exclude a rule. And there are very good tutorials written by Christian Follini on how to tune ModSecurity, and they can be found at netnea.com. So now in comes the new idea, the integration of a WAF in a DevOps pipeline. Because we don't want to do just DevOps, let's make ModSec DevOps. So let's insert the WAF early into the deployment pipeline and do the application tests without, but also with a WAF right away. And all tests have to succeed without and with a WAF. And in addition, no core rule set rule should be triggered by the tests. And those tests give the developers early feedback, so he gets the chance to fail early and fast. And we don't want to fix this issue later in production when it hurts. We want to fix it now when we still know what we have just checked into the repository. And each commit or push into the repository triggers a continuous integration run that starts the application, starts the WAF, and runs the application test through the WAF. And we always want to have our application in a deployable and runnable state with the WAF in front of it. So we know that the legitimate traffic of the application will not trigger a core rule set rule. And I think an application should go to release if it's fully tested with a WAF in front of it. And I think this is really great. We don't have to fear production issues later, and we just want to have more security. And now let me explain a possible setup. Normally, we have application tests that run against an application. And in this example, to write the application test, I use Test Cafe. It's an open source end-to-end web test tool. And we can also work with another tool here. Selenium is very popular, for example. So normally we have application tests that run against an application. And as a result, the application test should be green. And now I do the same test again, but this time with a WAF in front of it. And this means we start a third Docker container now. And as a result, I still expect that the application tests are green, are successful. And in addition, I expect that the ModSecurity log is empty, so that no core rule set rule was triggered by the tests. And let me show you now on how I implemented this on Circle CI. And in this demo, I've made an application change that I commit and push into my repository. And on the right side, we see that Circle CI starts to run. The first steps are not so important, but then the application is started in a container. And now the OWASP ModSecurity core rule set container is pulled and started as well. And now we run the application tests. First, the tests are run against the TCP port of the application container, because I want to be sure that the application tests and the application itself are okay. And for this demo, I've written 4 tests. So this is only a short test. I register a user in the web application. I log in a user. I search for a string in the application search box, and I log out again. And now I do the same tests again, but this time against the TCP port of the core rule set container. And this means I still test my application, but through the core rule set container, through the core rule set. And I do the same tests again. I register a user. I log in a user. I search for a string in the application search box, and I log out the user. And now I do a test with a malicious string because I want to be sure that my WAF would block. And at the end, I check the results. And in this example, the test triggered a core rule set rule. My ModSecurity log is not empty because I didn't want to show the happy path. And this means that I now should go and look at the ModSecurity log. And the message here is only if every of these steps is green, is successful, the application could go to production. So all these Docker containers are pulled and started, and the application tests are run very quickly. And this means that the developer gets fast feedback after a commit into the repository. And we don't lose much time here, but we get a lot of extra security. As I already mentioned, the core rule set is very easy to install, but it's even easier, of course, if you use it in a Docker container. And the official OWASP ModSecurity Docker image has an Apache or a reverse proxy configuration and configurable CRS variables that you can give during startup. And in this way, the core rule set can even be added easier, or can be added very easy to your continuous integration tests. So we also use ModSecurity and the core rule set at Puzzle ITC. And we also do these automated tests in pipelines. Not in all projects yet, but in some. And here we see an example of a Jenkins pipeline. And here we run integration tests through the core rule set to the application. And this means that we change the endpoint of the integration integration tests from the application to the WAF in front of it. And after some months of experience, we can say that we do not always fully trust the tests. We sometimes still use production logs because the test coverage has to be good to catch all possible false positives during the tests. So we sometimes still let the WAF run in production, and we still need some logs. And what I can also say is that sometimes the test tools also trigger false positives. And I very often see that they do not set request headers properly. And what I particularly like is that developers are very open to web application firewalls, but they may also need help. And one of the challenges is that they have to have the WAF in mind when something doesn't work anymore. And sometimes also error messages of a WAF are not very easy to understand for everyone. So we need to help them. And as I already mentioned, I want to spread the use of web application firewalls. And how can I achieve this? With infrastructure as code. And at Puzzle, we use Red Hat Openshift. Openshift is a Kubernetes distribution. And I wrote a template to add a WAF to a project with only one command. And the goal of this template is to have a running WAF inside of the project. And why did I write this template? Well, the developers, they don't have a need for web application firewalls, but they are interested. So I have to make it easy for them to add a web application firewall to their project. And I do this with documentation, a template, and as little effort as possible. And after some months, we also discovered challenges. Adding a WAF to one project is one thing, but running WAFs for an entire company is another. And the proper update process is also required. And at Puzzle ITC, we love open source software, and that's why we also contribute and publish a lot. And I also open sourced our WAF image and OpenShift template at GitHub under the organization Puzzle. And now you say maybe, oh, that's bad because we don't use OpenShift, but it's not, because we also published Kubernetes Helm charts. So feel free to test it and use it for your company. And as always, contributions and feedback is very welcome. So to answer my first question, yes, I think a WAF in your DevOps pipeline and in production, of course, is your friend. You get an additional layer of defense in front of the web application. You get a logging and monitoring mechanism. You also get the ability to do virtual patching in front of your web application, because ModSecurity rules are often faster to write than fixing the application. And it's all open source and free. So I think everyone is happy. The developer is happy because we don't break his application anymore. The operator is happy because we don't have issues in production. And of course, the security engineer is happy because we have a WAF in place. And I would also like to give you a few links. At corerulset.org, you find all the information about the core rule set and also blog posts about this topic and other topics. And at puzzle.ch, you also find blog posts about this topic in German and also other blog posts. And the official OWASP ModSecurity core rule set container can be found at Docker Hub. And we published our CentOS-based WAF at Quai.io under the organization Puzzle ITC. And the source of this WAF image, the OpenShift template, and also the Kubernetes Helm charts can be found at GitHub under the organization Puzzle. And the demo we have seen is the Pixie CRS pipeline of the OWASP DevSlow project. And we also plan to publish other pipelines, to spread the use of web application firewalls. And of course, our ModSecurity core rule set project can be found at GitHub as well under the organization Spider Labs. So give it a try, and this is really a cool thing. You just need to insert the WAF early into the deployment pipeline and give the developers early feedback. And I hope that every one of you will now add a WAF to production and to a pipeline as well. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, Francisca, thank you. That was amazing. First of all, I want to ask a personal question. Like, say you do not have a WAF in place for now. What would you say is the first step for the developer to start with, say, from tomorrow morning?
You want to add a WAF now, okay. So you put it into your project, you start a WAF, and as I said, if you have tests, you can point these tests to your WAF, and maybe you already have false positives, or you already have errors in your log, so you can tune them. And if you don't have tests, you can write them, or if you don't want to write them and you don't have any tests, you can just add the WAF or ModSecurity core rule set with a high limit so that it doesn't block requests. You can have a look at the logs and then tune your WAF and slowly bring down the limit so that the WAF gets into a blocking state.
Okay. Other question, is it also, I mean, you were explaining that there are Docker images available. Is it also, I mean, you can do this in your pipeline, but to get even earlier feedback, to get it on your local machine. I mean, is that a good practice to do that with, for instance, one of the Docker images and test that on your local machine that way before you actually push it into your Git pipeline?
Yeah, I think an important point here is that you do some kind of automation. Yeah, maybe you don't want to do this by hand or manual, but yes, of course, if you have some automation of tests on your laptop, if you change the code and if you have some tests, you can also add the WAF there if you use it with a Docker container, yes.
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
I have a question from Rick over here. He asked, would you recommend other modules to use with ModSecurity CRS as part of your web app container?
Other modules? So, what is meant by other modules?
I am not completely sure, but are there? Well, let's generalize the question. Besides WAF, like, okay, you have to take care of your own security inside your applications. Are there other things you suggest to use except for WAF?
Ah, okay, yeah. So maybe if you build an application, if you have an application, you put a WAF in front of it, so you have this extra security layer, this extra safety net. But of course, you can also. It's also important that you put some security tests into your build pipeline. If you do some code analysis, for example, or you do dependency checks of your application, that's also important. It's also important to secure the web application behind the WAF. As I said, it's not if you use a web application firewalls, you're safe. You don't have to do any security checks anymore. It's still important that you have a secure web application and that you have secure code. And yeah, it's if you have multiple layer of defense, that's even better.
There's also a question how about the use of mod evasive, for instance?
I don't know this module. I'm sorry.
Okay. No worries. No worries. It happens.
Sure.
I mean,
Short answer.
Yeah, well, that can happen. That's no worries about that. Oh yeah, one other question I personally have is with a WAF you can block certain requests towards your application. Is it possible or preferable to get into the logging of that? Because I would be interested, for instance, like which ones are blocked, because do I have a lot of requests on, for instance, path reversal examples or SQL injection examples, to get alerted by that? Is that a general practice, or how do you think about that? I mean,
yeah, that's exactly one of the problems. You now have these logs now, and what do you do with these logs?
Exactly.
You also want to monitor them, and we are still, yeah, we are still at the beginning, and we are still working on this. But what we are doing now is we monitor these logs, of course, and we have thresholds. We don't want to alert every 403 forbidden, because yeah, it's a false positive, it's an attack, and we are still figuring out where do we want to make the threshold. When do we want to alert? When it's an attack? And yeah, it's very difficult to say this, to have this threshold for every application. So it depends a lot. And we are still working on these thresholds and on this monitoring.
I can imagine. I mean, your example with the union, where there's also a false positive, and you do not want to get alerted instantly by,
yeah,
well, just one single hit, but you want to make sure that it's a reasonable amount of that.
Yeah.
But
if you have a lot of 403 forbidden errors, then maybe you have an application change that was not told to the WAF, so that a lot of false positives trigger, but it can also be an attack. So yeah, you have to alert it and then have a look at it and decide if it's an attack or it's just an application change that triggers a lot of false positives.
Another question over here is, can the core rule set be customized further? For instance, the development team, if the development team can do that to better fit the need of an application. Is there an easy way to do that, or where to start with that? I think you mentioned some of this, but
what you can do is, if you have, I say, a MongoDB a database behind your web application, you can maybe switch off the SQL injection rules, or MySQL injection, or if you want, you can, of course, you can always run the entire core rule set. That's what we do now, but you can also switch off part of the core rule set if you think I don't need PHP rules because I don't have a PHP application. Yes, you can. You can very granularly exclude rules.
So it's quite easy to include and exclude rules accordingly, that it fits your personal preference or your personal application.
Yes, it can definitely be done. But yeah, we do not, we always run the full core rule set. We do
All right.
Not yet, maybe if we have performance problems or if we have other problems, maybe we begin to exclude rules. Yeah.
You were telling that the WAF is actually like the first layer of defense before you get into your application. How would you suggest, if you have like a bunch of applications, do you use one WAF, or do you use multiple WAFs depending on the preferences of different applications? What is your view on that?
We have a lot of applications, and we have them in separate projects or namespaces. If we are talking about Openshift, for example, and of course there we have a WAF for each of the projects or each of the applications. And if we have multiple applications, we put one WAF in front of it. Yeah, we can do both. Maybe the rule of writing is a bit easier if you have one web application firewall per application.
Yeah, I guess it also depends on your architecture and things like if you have a lot of, for instance, micro or nano services, that it might be useful to have one WAF. And if you have some bigger applications, that it might be useful to have a WAF each. So that's depending on your how you design the application, right?
Yeah, it depends. It depends very much, yes.
All right. So I want to leave it at that, and I want to thank you for your presentation. First of all, I think it's very useful. I didn't look that much into WAFs before I was attending this one, so I think it is very useful for people to use it and to integrate it that easy. Like your example, how you did it with Circle CI, it triggers me that okay, it's just as easy. If it's just as easy as that, why not just use it straight away, right? So thank you for that explanation. We have some other things coming up. I mean, we've got more events coming up. So the next event will be at February 20th, and it will be how to implement DevSecOps across the entire organization. So how to get that DevSecOps mindset and that DevSecOps ID across the whole organization. It's a webinar by Nadira Bajiri. If I am, hopefully I don't mispronounce the name, because I'm very good at mispronouncing names. I'm sorry for that. But tune in next time, February 20 at 5 p.m. GMT. We will have a new one again. Thanks, Francisca, so far for your excellent presentation. This will be online like instantly after I close this one down. And for all of you out there, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you later.
Thank you for having me.